Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Good morning, it's Maajid Nawaz sitting in for James O'Brien. Labour's Keir Starmer has been forced to reaffirm that Labour has not ruled out a referendum that could cancel Brexit by having a Remain option on the ballot. And that comes after yesterday, John McDonnell, that's Labour's Shadow Treasury Secretary, saying that he appeared to insist that the party could only back a vote on the terms of Brexit itself and not whether we remain in. In other words, a second referendum, as it's colloquially referred to, for John McDonnell would not contain a Remain option. But Keir Starmer reaffirming that the Labour Party hasn't ruled out a Remain option on the second vote. Should a second referendum contain a Remain option on the ballot? I make no secrets about my Remain tendencies. I think a second vote on the terms of the deal Theresa May brings back would make no sense unless it was accept the deal or stay in the European Union as the two questions on the ballot paper. Of course, it's not for me to decide what would be on that ballot paper. Let me explain to you why I think nothing else makes sense. Theresa May brings checkers to Parliament. Parliament, as will likely happen, and this is not me just predicting stuff through a crystal ball. This is me based on the evidence we have as it stands. The Labour Party says they will vote down whatever deal Theresa May brings to Parliament as the Chequers deal, right? Whatever manifestation of the Chequers deal she brings, Labour have already said they will vote it down. Now, you can add to that the SNP and the Lib Dems and the Remain MPs in the Conservative Party. And so it's likely, based upon the facts as they stand, that Theresa May's deal in a version of Chequers, as a version of Chequers, will not pass Parliament. And what happens next? Well, that means the Prime Minister loses a motion of confidence in Parliament. And when she loses that vote, it will trigger a general election. Now, that general election is a vote, a constituency-based vote, either for the Labour Party or for the Conservatives, because, of course, in many constituencies, voting Lib Dem is a wasted vote. But that will not be a vote over Brexit. Now, because Corbyn and Theresa May are both saying that, well, Corbyn is effectively a Brexiteer and Theresa May is saying she will deliver Brexit, that doesn't satisfy the question of what the public's view is on the terms of Theresa May's deal. The only thing that will satisfy the public's views answer to that is to have a direct vote on it. And so if you go to a direct vote, what should the ballot contain? Should that vote and the options for what you're voting for say it's either Chequers or World Trade Organization rules, and we're going to Brexit, hard Brexit, and revert to World Trade Organization rules? Or should it say it's either Chequers or we stay in and try and fight to reform the EU? I prefer the latter. And let me briefly explain to you why having the option on the ballot to say it's either Chequers or World Trade Organization rules makes no sense. Because nobody, Brexiter or Remainer, disputes that the Chequers deal is the worst of all worlds. Remainers don't want it in the first place. Brexiteers, and I can assure you, having spoken to, as I say, Mr. Brexit himself, he hands over to me on Sundays, Nigel Farage, they will be campaigning against the Chequers deal because they don't think it's hard enough. Nigel said to me, it's Brexit in nothing but name, the Chequers deal. So you will have Brexiteers campaigning against it and Remainers campaigning against it. And so it's a bad deal. And the reason it's a bad deal, mind you, let me explain why it's a bad deal. Because it obliges us to all of the rules of the European Union without allowing us a vote in the European Union. Why? Because we've left the club. And when we leave the club, we're leaving and we're taking our voting rights with us. And yet we're obliged by all the rules that they then make. And my point to Brexiteers is, and as I say, I know some of you listen to what I say, and I love you dearly and disagree with you. And so my point to you will be the following, and my appeal to your hearts. you were complaining that Brussels is a dictatorship. If Chequers passes, it will be a dictatorship because we would have bound ourselves by European Union rules without having a vote in how to make those rules. That's precisely, surely, why you wanted to Brexit in the first place, because you believed Brussels was dictating to us. Well, the deal you've just come up with, Chequers, is that. It's allowing for Brussels to dictate to us without us having any democratic say, direct democracy or indirect democracy, in the way those rules are made. And it's why Chequers is such an appalling deal. And so if the ballot box says Chequers or World Trade Organization rules and hard Brexit, the ballot box is effectively saying terrible deal or even worse deal. The ballot box is effectively saying in that scenario dictatorship by Brussels or hard Brexit and years of economic hardship, uncertainty, 30% off the housing prices, the pound plummeting, right? So it's a terrible deal or an even worse horrible deal. I think having only those two options on the ballot box makes no sense. It's the equivalent of committing political suicide. Because the options will be vote for a dictatorship from the European Union or crash out. And in that scenario, and again, I'm still appealing directly here to Brexiteers, in that scenario, the Chequers deal will win. So you, Brexiteers, will end up with everything you feared. You'll end up with a dictatorship of the European Union binding us to their rules while we have no say. And the reason why, if it's a choice on the ballot box between Chequers and WTO rules, why Chequers will win is because the Remainers still will not be able to bring themselves to crash out of the EU. So they'll hold their noses and they'll vote for the Chequers deal. And of course, the Remainers, if you combine the Remainers in this country with, because keep in mind, it was 48%, 52%. And if you ask how many among the Brexiteers are hard Brexiteers versus soft Brexiteers, and will probably take some of those votes too. And so you'll end up with Chequers winning if it's on the ballot box simply against the World Trade option. But if Chequers wins, Brexiteers, dear Brexiteers, if Chequers wins, as I say, we will end up being dictated to by Brussels. And that's why it's so important that it's not just those two options on the ballot box. Because better than the Chequers deal, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, Brexiteers, better than the Chequers deal is to remain in and have a vote over the rules that the European Union imposes on us. Surely, by your own argument, if you fear a dictatorship from Brussels, you wouldn't want to take our vote and our right to vote, and our right to have a say away. And so you'd have to agree with me that if it was a choice you'd have to make, that staying in the EU is still better than the Chequers deal. Brexiteers would have to, by their own logic, concede that having a vote at the table is better than not having a vote and still being bound by their rules. I don't know how else to put it. By your own logic, that makes sense. And so surely you should not want Chequers and the Chequers deal to win, which it will do if you only have the WTO option and the Chequers option on the ballot. So there must be a Remain option there. And that option allows for those of us to say, look, this whole thing has been a terrible mess. Let's reset and hit the reset button. We've learned a lot in the last 2 years, and we just simply tried. It made no sense. It didn't work out. Let's send it back to the public to have their say. That for me, is being more democratic. It's not being undemocratic. It's adding more choice to the table, not less, which surely is the meaning of democracy. Now, we will be crossing to the Labour conference in Liverpool to speak to LBC's political editor, Theo Usherwood, who is there, and to get the latest from Keir Starmer's speech, who is speaking right now. I see on my screens Diane Abbott staring at him intently. And so whatever Keir Starmer says, it is related to, of course, whether the second vote on the terms of the Brexit deal should have a Remain option on there. Keep in mind that John McDonnell yesterday appeared to insist that it would not have a Remain option on there. So if Theresa May's deal does fail at Parliament, the civil war that will ensue within the Conservative Party one can only assume would also likely ensue within the Labour Party. Because all his life, from before I was born, and I checked this, from before I was born, Corbyn has been a Brexiteer. And I can assure you, I was born 40 years ago, which means for over 40 years, Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, has been a Brexiteer. And whenever an opportunity in Parliament has come up to vote, he has voted in antagonism to the European Union, including, by the way, supporting UKIP in wanting this referendum in the first place. They say never kiss a Tory. Corbyn has been in bed with UKIP on Brexit. So take that, Labour Corbyn supporters, and stick it up your metaphoric thing. So, the point being that Corbyn, being a Brexiteer as he is, when this vote comes to the public, it will divide the Labour Party as much as it divides the Conservative Party. And to return to the oft-repeated theme, it leaves us, we Remainers who want to remain in a reformed European Union, politically homeless with nothing to do. And if the vote goes to a general election instead of a direct vote by the public, it doesn't solve the problem. Because you've got a Brexiteer leading Labour and a Remain voter leading the Conservative Party who is promising to deliver Brexit regardless. So where do Remain voters go if it's a general election? Which is why I think it must be a direct vote and the Remain option must be on the ballot. You're listening to Maajid Nawaz, sitting in for James O'Brien, and the time now is 11:15. Right, so you all heard me there sum up my view, my analysis. It is, of course, only analysis, and, it contains predictions about how things will go based upon evidence, but clearly it could be wrong. Now it's time for you to tell me what you think. 0345 6060973. Chris has texted meanwhile saying, Maajid, you and I agree that Chequers is the worst of all worlds. Indeed, it is. I think it creates a Brussels dictatorship. Ergo, any second referendum with two options should be between no deal and Remain. But could we remain on his existing terms, having invoked Article 50 and caused so much trouble? Or would we be punished? It's a good question. I do know that, of course, there is some dispute at the moment as to whether Article 50 can be reversed. It isn't as definitive as a caller on one of my shows insisted by saying it cannot be reversed. And I suggested to him that Lord Kerr, the author of Article 50, said it can be reversed. And then he said Lord Kerr doesn't know what he's talking about. I asked him whether he was legally trained or had any experience in constitutional law, and he said no. Right? So Lord Kerr, the author of Article 50, doesn't know what he's talking about, but somebody who's not a trained constitutional lawyer knows better than him on LBC. And that's the kind of nature of the debate we're in at the moment. That clip, by the way, is up on lbc.co.uk. And so, having heard that and having read the text that I just read out there, I don't know if the EU would punish us. I would imagine that they wouldn't want to punish us because, they would welcome the option of maintaining the integrity of the European Union bloc. And so, if the legal dispute about whether reversing the triggering of Article 50 can indeed be resolved, then once it is resolved, I would, if I were the European Union, be very glad to embrace this great economic powerhouse that is the United Kingdom. One thing Brexiteers get right, by the way, one thing Brexiteers do get right, is that we are a huge economic powerhouse. We are a very strong country economically, politically, culturally, and we do bring a lot to the table. Brexiteers are correct when they say that. It's something to be very proud of. And so I imagine the European Union would be delighted if we were to stay in. I think we're going to go to Joe on the line from Bristol. 0345 6060973 is the number to call. Speak to us, Joe.
Hello, sorry, you'll have to excuse because I have a sore throat.
Right.
Okay, so just bear with me. I think one thing that's rarely discussed during this debate is the fact that basically we want to remain in the single market, but be free of the political project called the EU, just like Norway. But we have to always bear in mind that the rules and the standards and the regulations covering or governing the single market are not made in Brussels. And this is something that a lot of people don't realise. They're made by a group of quite a few international organisations that set the standards and set the regulations. And then they're sent to the EU, Brussels, and they're rubber-stamped into EU law without debate, and then they are distributed amongst the member states, and then rubber-stamped into a national law. So when people say, we don't have a seat at the table, no, we don't have a seat at if we left, we wouldn't have a seat at the table. Or if we went for checkers, we wouldn't have a seat at the table. We would still, we wouldn't have a seat at the table, you're right, but we would have a seat at the big table where the rules and the regulations are actually made.
Which table is that?
It's a table at these large international organisations that actually make the standards. This is why Norway does so well, because it's got a table. It sits at the table with the big boys and makes the rules and regulations before they go to Brussels.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're in favour of the checkers deal? Is that what you're saying?
I'm in favour of Norway, actually. I think that's the only way we can come out with,
model.
Let
me explain for the listeners the difference between the Canada Plus model and the Norway model.
I have no idea. Lovey, I don't know.
No, I'll just give a brief explanation. The Canada Plus model doesn't mean we're in the single market. It just means that we negotiate a separate free trade deal with the European Union, whereas the Norway model means we're in the single market, of course.
Yes.
That's the difference.
The Norway model means that we remain in the single market.
Yep.
We're already members of the EEA. We just joined EFTA. And then we have all the benefits of the single market. Yeah. We don't have to apply for it. There's no negotiation, nothing like that. Yeah. And we just join.
But Norway, though, Joe, Norway, though, in a sense there, it's bound by the single market. And
yes.
But doesn't really have a say over the future of the EU.
No, sorry?
It doesn't have a say over the future of the EU.
Well, I don't really care about the future of the EU. I care about the future of the UK.
Yeah, but it's economy.
I suppose Norwegians care about the future. But we're only bound by the laws governing the single market. That's all.
No, but Joe,
in Norway,
what I'm suggesting,
Norway are not bound by the political rules and regulations.
What I'm suggesting is they're impossible to separate in the way that you seem to be doing in such a clear-cut way. Economy. The strength of the economy, the strength of economic performance is inevitably going to tie into political decisions that are made in Brussels. I mean, just take how Germany and Greece in their relationship, when Greece was, it was still crashing, when Greece's economy was failing, and the relationship Germany and Greece have with each other. I know that's related also to the European single currency. But what I'm suggesting, it's very difficult to separate economic policy from political decisions.
The Norwegians do it very well.
I'm not so sure they do.
And we could take a few lessons from them.
Well, I'm not so sure they do, Joe. And Norway doesn't have a foreign policy, doesn't have an army. It's not the same comparison. We're a very different country to Norway. And I would suspect that, and it's why, actually, I think, that Brexiteers as well as Remainers wouldn't be happy with the Chequers deal. If the Brexiteers are saying that the Chequers deal is in Brexit in nothing but name, the reason they're saying that is because they recognise that we will be bound by European Union rules and economic decisions, while having absolutely no say in them. Even Brexiteers are recognising that. And actually, again, my appeal to Brexiteers was, if we do go down the Chequers route, we end up with precisely the dictatorship from Brussels that you originally feared. We don't currently, as members of the EU, have a dictatorship from Brussels because we have an equal say over the way those rules are made. It's Chequers that brings the dictatorship from Brussels, which is why it cannot come down to a choice simply on the ballot box between the Chequers deal and no deal. Because that's a choice between the Day of Judgment and hellfire. Monesh wants to speak to us from Southall.
Hi, Maajid, how are you?
I'm all right.
I'm very disappointed with the way things are going at the moment, because whoever invented Chequers, if you look at everything, it doesn't achieve anything. You've got all these supposedly intelligent people speaking on behalf and going to Europe with a deal on the table, a proposition, and you come up with something like Chequers, which doesn't solve anything. It doesn't give us anything better than what we had before, and it goes against, accordingly to what they're saying, is what they voted for. So how can that possibly even an option to consider? And having said that, if you look at the premise of how this all started, I think it's just a bad vision of how we think of things. Everyone goes on about how much money we wasted being in this big club, Europe. Instead of thinking of how much money we spent or wasted, why don't we look at in different terms of how much money we invested? Because it's like all these years we've put money in is towards something. And if you look at the positive outcome of what we were part of a group of, and now, sorry to say this and prolong myself, but we're stuck in a situation where we've got Theresa May, who is a Remainer, trying to do a Brexit deal, which has got no leg to stand on, and you've got Jeremy Corbyn, who is a Brexiteer. And for love of money, I want him to win because I want him to win the next election. But he needs to change his attitude and say, right, let's have a Remain on our tables.
He's not going to, Raj. That's the problem with Corbyn, because he's been a Brexiteer from before I was born.
I think he's too stubborn. I mean, that's the herein lies the problem. He needs to change his views, I think.
I tell you what, there's another word for stubborn when it comes to politics. It's called dogma. He's an ideologue. He's an ideologue.
Well, that's going to be his biggest downfall, in my opinion, because I think he would make a great Prime Minister, and I think he's the man that can save us and bring us light and joy and bring us back into the system. And if he's not willing to change his ways, I'm sorry, we're going to suffer.
We are, and whether it's on Brexit, Monash, or on many other things, I don't know if ideologues are able to see reality as it is rather than as they want it to be. And that's the danger of ideology, unfortunately. I'm going to read to you a text from... whenever I speak, and I know James has this same tweeter, I'm just going to give him a shout-out, because James is also... I've heard James shout out to him. I am incorrigible. Now, he and I, or she and I, whoever this tweeter is, have our disagreements on a few other things, because I've seen a few tweets critical of me, but I've got to say, on the Remain debate, I am incorrigible on Twitter is all over it, and it's wonderful to see. So anyway, I am incorrigible responded to the last caller, Joe, who was saying that we're not really leaving our ability to have a say in the way the EU makes the rules under the Chequers deal, because the rules are made by some vague international body somewhere else, and so it makes no difference if we accept Chequers. Of course, she was wrong, and the best way to summarise the incorrect nature of that summary is by reading I Am Incorrigible's tweet, which says, when we talk about EU rulemaking, we're not talking about ISO rules and product safety standards, which are set by international agreements. Say, for example, electricity standards. We're talking about rules decided within the EU to govern products and services sold, in capitals, inside the EU. And of course, I Am Incorrigible is absolutely correct. Quality and safety standards are a very different thing to the rules that the EU makes about the products that the EU sells to its own internal market. And those are the rules we'll have absolutely no say over under the Chequers deal, while being bound by them. That is the dictatorship by Brussels that the Brexiteers feared. And so it cannot be a Brexit option for Brexiteers. It contradicts the very thing they wanted to vote against when they voted to leave in the first place. Oh, it's just one of those days. It's one of those days where things seem to be going wrong. I won't bore you with the details, but I'm glad that you hopefully don't seem to be... noticing how wrong things have gone this morning. Technical gremlins they are. But talking of technical gremlins, we're going to somebody who isn't a gremlin, but I hope there's no technical gremlins while we're trying to speak to him. Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor, is at the Labour conference in Liverpool to sum up for us what he just heard in Keir Starmer's speech. Theo.
He has just finished speaking, Maajid. Now, in normal money, Sir Keir Starmer does not have rock-star status amongst the Labour Party faithful. If this were Glastonbury, he would not be playing the pyramid stage. He would be in a tent somewhere off to the side, because, of course, he's seen by many supporters of Jeremy Corbyn of being more towards the centre of British politics than being on the left. But with Brexit going badly, the People's Vote campaign getting into full swing and demanding that Labour put the option of a second referendum, or force through the option of a second referendum with the option to remain in the European Union, Sir Keir Starmer this morning found his voice. This is what he had to say on that second vote.
Our preference is clear. We want a general election to sweep away this failed government and conference. Having swept them away, we want to install a radical Labour government capable of transforming this country. And that's what should happen. But if that's not possible, we must have other options. And conference, that must include campaigning for a public vote.
Now, the position that
Right, so it appears that we are having gremlins there. I told you things are going wrong. But anyway, we heard partly there from Theo Ashwood, and we heard a summary of what Keir Starmer said and Keir Starmer's voice himself. Now, it appeared to me, as a listener, that Keir Starmer was saying that the first order priority would be a general election to, quote, sweep away the Conservative government. And if that's not possible, he said, campaigning for a public vote. Now, of course, the problem with that, folks, is a general election does not address the question of the terms of Brexit or Remain. It simply doesn't, because Corbyn himself is a Brexiteer. So in a general election, the Labour Party, one can only imagine, would lead us towards a general election to unseat the Tories based upon whatever they think works in each constituency to get a majority. And so if the general election is the priority, I think it sidesteps the question of the public vote. Now, I hear we've got Theo back, so we're going to go back to you, Theo, to continue your reflections on Keir Starmer's speech.
We have swatted those gremlins, I am hoping, Maajid. The second part of Keir's speech, well, actually, it's the same theme. It's this idea that they announced this morning, it was an open secret. Of course, we all knew it was going to happen, that Labour would vote against Theresa May's Chequers plan when it comes back to the House of Commons, if, of course, it makes it that far. So Keir, actually, he received a standing ovation. Very, very popular with what he had to say.
On conference, I know you want to know, our members want to know where we stand on our tests going in to this important vote in the autumn. Some say we may vote for the deal that the Prime Minister brings back, maybe abstain, maybe vote for a vague deal. So let me be absolutely clear. If the Prime Minister returns with a deal that does not meet our tests, and that looks increasingly likely, we will vote against her deal.
So Labour are going to vote against the deal. Now, the parliamentary arithmetic to this, Maajid, is interesting because the Prime Minister is saying it's either Chequers or no deal. So we end up with a vote in the House of Commons, let's say beginning of December. And she presents the remnants of Chequers after she secures some concessions from the European Union. Let's say that's hypothetically what happens. Now, the Tory Brexiteers aren't going to like it. The likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg, Andrew Bridgen, and they could number somewhere between 20, 30 possibly. And then you're going to have, as Sir Keir Starmer said there, Labour are going to vote against the Chequers plan, which then knocks you into no-deal territory, because Theresa May is not saying that she'll resign as Prime Minister. She won't trigger a confidence vote as things stand. She's not saying that. And so we may well end up in a situation where Labour Remainers, in order that we don't flip to a no-deal Brexit, turn around and say, actually, Chequers is, from a Remain point of view, is actually quite good. So they could possibly defy Sir Keir Starmer, defy Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour whip, and vote with the government. That's what they're going to be. That's what the cabinet are going to be, and Theresa May are going to be relying on here if we end up getting that far.
Thank you, Theo. That's Theo Ashwood, LBC's political editor at Labour Conference, summarising Keir Starmer's speech. Do we still have Theo, by the way? Can I ask him a question? Are you there, Theo? Did we lose you? All right, we've lost him. Doesn't matter. He's gone. I think because I thanked him, he thought it was over. That's LBC's political editor at Labour Conference. Now, what it does strike the note Theo left on there that if it is an option between Chequers and no deal, that there's not necessarily a clause there that Theresa May resigns if she loses the vote on Chequers or no deal in Parliament, and so if Chequers is voted against in Parliament and Theresa May stays as Prime Minister, that she will take us down the no-deal route. I was saying earlier, I think that will trigger a no-confidence motion in the Prime Minister, and the no-confidence motion could well win if she loses the vote in Parliament on the Chequers deal. But also interesting is you heard Theo speculate the other way around, that she could stay on as Prime Minister, that it wouldn't trigger a no-confidence motion, and then she would try and steer the ship towards a no-deal option, and that Labour members in Parliament, Parliamentary Labour Party, may well vote to support her in the Chequers vote to avoid her steering the ship to the no-deal direction. But I think what's more likely, and what I was going to ask Theo is, I think it's more likely that her losing the Chequers vote in Parliament could well, and should actually trigger a no-confidence motion, taking the country to a general election. And then that's the problem, that if it goes to a general election, it's not a vote over Brexit and Remain. It's a vote over Labour and Conservative and who you want in government, which is sidestepping the original question, because the question as to our relationship with the European Union is as obscure with the leadership of the Labour Party as it is with Theresa May. Corbyn is a Brexiteer. John McDonnell yesterday said he doesn't want Remain on the option. I mean, we're led by, in the Labour Party, it's led by Brexiteers who are sceptical of the European project. And yet in Theresa May, we have a Remain voter promising to deliver Brexit. And so it's not as simple as to say that the general election will fix this problem for us. Going back to the lines, Laura wants to speak to us from Westminster. Go for it, Laura.
Hi, Maajid. My point is that it's not been widely discussed on LBC, but the fact is a lot of people didn't even vote in the EU referendum because they thought that there was no chance we'd even leave the EU. Specifically, 27.79% of eligible electoral voters didn't even vote. We thought that there's no way we'll leave the EU. We deserve a second chance to vote. A lot of people will be voting, and it will change the... It will change the prospect.
And were you among them, Laura? Were you among them?
Yes, I was, and I know a lot of people that didn't even vote. They thought that there was no chance.
How many times have you kicked yourself?
I have kicked myself a lot, but, now we've had a chance over the last 2 years to see what's really going on with this. It's like a bad nightmare. The pound is going down and down and down. Why should the whole fate of the UK economy lean on 2%? 2%.
And I tell indeed, and these are points I make, Laura. But I tell you, for the life of me, and this is why every time there's been a general election, I've shouted at the top of my lungs, please, people, vote, because it makes a difference. It means the future of our country goes in one direction or another. And I know, Laura. Well, thank you for calling in, by the way. I do appreciate your honesty. I know what Brexiteers are going to say to you. They're going to say, "Stop whinging. You had your chance and you missed it." And frankly, honestly, and I'm going to let you come back on this, but they would have half a point. Only half a point, mind you. And the half a point is that, for people that deliberately didn't vote in that referendum, to now demand a say, you can see why that would frustrate Brexiteers. But I'm going to let you come back on this, Laura. Go for it.
It may frustrate them, but the fact of the matter is we had no idea what was going to happen. We had no idea that the pound was going to drop and drop and drop consecutively. We had no idea what was going to happen. And now with Theresa May's Chequers or no deal, that's ridiculous. It's a bad nightmare. We deserve it. A lot of people, 27.79%. That's a lot. That's millions. That's a lot of people. Yeah. And they will vote this time. And we just definitely deserve a chance. All
right, Laura, thank you for calling in. We're going to, Carol, if you bear with us, we'll come to you after the break because the time is 11:45. On the question as to whether a Remain option should be on the ballot paper if there were to be a public vote over the terms of Theresa May's deal, Dan in Leicester has texted saying, "Hi, Maajid, in my opinion, Chequers is designed to do one thing. That is to unite Remain and Leave voters around support for a second referendum with a no-deal Remain option on the ballot." Well, I hope so, Dan. Another texter said, the EU has stated that it will not accept Chequers. So it is madness to continue with discussing it. Where are the grown-ups? That's from Ben. We're going to go to Carol on the line from Stanmore. Speak to us, Carol.
Hi, I'm a Remainer. I feel like I'm at an AA meeting or something, but I'm admitting that. And I'm proud of it. And I'm also a Tory voter. So there are various reasons that prompt my question. You say that the Chequers deal and the no deal would both be entirely negative and wouldn't really give us any different situation. In fact, we'd be worse off than we were before.
Well, no deal would be worse than Chequers.
Let me please finish. Yeah. If that is the case, then why are the EU rejecting us having the right to the Chequers deal? Not that I'm 100% for it, but what would be their objection?
I'll tell you what their objection is.
Saying is true.
I'll tell you what their objection is. Well, I'll tell you what their objection is. The Northern Ireland question is one of their major objections, and the other is a dispute over the nature of because the Chequers deal will keep us within the single market, and their dispute is over the nature of how we impose or check their goods coming in and out of the United Kingdom. So I think to be honest, the fact that they've rejected it anyway, I think Theresa May will have to tweak it, but we will end up with some mutated version of a deal that ends up with a dictatorship from Brussels. And that is what I'm suggesting is worse than the original thing Brexiteers voted against, which was us and our membership of the European Union. Would you not agree, Carol?
Yes, the way you're putting it, yes, but I'm just talking about other things. The other thing is that as a Tory voter, if the various scenarios that you and your reporter suggested come to fruition, wouldn't it make a difference, and wouldn't you be more likely to have a Tory government because the Labour Party are making it very clear that they would not have a new vote. So if another referendum, they would never allow us to say that we can't leave, but they would tweak the way in which we would do it. If that is the case, and the Tory party were to say you can vote again, free vote, stay or remain, knowing what you know now, why wouldn't that benefit the Conservative Party?
Well, we don't know what Labour's stance is. It's part of the great frustration with Labour because John McDonnell has said that Remain won't be on the option, and Keir Starmer today seems to suggest it could be. And part of the problem here is no one really knows where Labour and their leadership stand on Brexit, which is why I'm suggesting a general election doesn't fix the problem. Only a direct public vote will fix the problem as to what our relationship with the EU should be like going forward. And that then comes down to the sorts of questions that should be on the ballot for that direct public vote. But thanks for calling, Carol. Linda wants to speak to us from Trafford. Go for it, Linda.
Oh, hi, Maajid. Thanks for taking my call. I do think we should have a referendum with an option to remain, because what worries me, if we crash out with a no deal and we go on to WTO, we'll actually be treated as a third country, because at the moment we deal with WTO as a part of Europe. So if we come out as a third country, it won't solve the problem in Northern Ireland. We still have to put a border up. Yep. And also it would damage us economically, because it would involve tariffs and everything, and it would damage our agriculture.
Well, Linda, let me make this very absolutely and abundantly clear.
I just don't know anything about it. No, and that's the problem. Nobody does.
No. Brexiteers agree that the WTO option, in other words, a no-deal scenario, Brexiteers even accept it would mean immediate economic hardship for Brits. Yeah. They accept that. And the reason they know that is because, of course, there are a whole bunch of things you have to do when you revert to WTO rules, and one of them is renegotiate a separate and independent standards. And I'm not saying a trade deal, I'm saying a standards deal with every single country, because there are, one thing is, tariff barriers to trade. There are non-tariff barriers to trade, and one of them, for example, means standards in products and services. If your products contain, let's take the example of children's toys, if your children's toys contain dangerous objects within them, if a child rips off the head of a doll, for example, you don't want to see a metal spike there that could harm the child. So the standards of what's imported in and out of this country are governed by certain rules, and you have to basically have quality and testing on each of those. Currently, our membership of the European Union guarantees we don't have to test each one of those, because we are signatories to a treaty that guarantees we'll make them in accordance to EU standards. But even Brexiteers, I think, admit, Linda, that the WTO option, in other words, the no-deal option, will mean immediate economic hardship. They come back with and say, but we will eventually recover. Of course, eventually, what's that, in 20 years, 50 years, and 100 years? I mean, when's eventually happen? And that's one of the conundrums. Anthony from Staines.
Yes, good morning, Maajid. Yes, well, let me just say that we're going to get through this. We're going to get through to next March without a general election, without a second ballot, and May will still be there.
Oh, wow, OK, yeah. All right, explain,
yes.
Explain.
Because she has two things on her side. One is the economy, which is doing relatively well, and that gives a little bit of leeway with that old money tree. Oh. And you watch her.
You mean the one she shook when she gave all that money to the...
Yes, and she's rather lucky, because she hasn't gone into John, McDonald territory and nationalised everything. She's got that money to throw at the DUP. She can give a little bit more money, and she can even play around with Scotland and get that vote through. It is, inshallah, it is fate that we go out of the EU. We have to really put our faith in whatever.
What?
It is.
You were being all logical there, and then suddenly it's fate, so it's just going to happen because it's destined.
Yes.
Is there some bad karma coming round to hit us because we did something nasty to the Europeans? It's just destined.
Well, no, I think it's good karma. I think that,
I can sense that. Which is, may I suggest to you, it's why you think it's fate. If I've got somebody under my boot and my foot is on their head and they're like, on the floor, and I say it's fate that you're down there, it's because I'm quite happy with where I am, Anthony. So may I suggest to you that you're saying it's fate because you're happy that we're Brexiting?
Indeed, because we just sort of pick ourselves up, get that foot off our head and move forward, which I think is what Theresa May is actually quite good at.
How long do you think it will take us to recover from the Brexit slump?
It won't.
There won't be a slump.
I guarantee you, we will continue, the economy will continue on its upward track we have at the moment. There might be a few cows delayed at the border, but we will continue.
A no-deal option won't have any impact on the pound or the strength of our economy or jobs?
Really? I'll tell you why, because we have a transition.
Yeah.
And that means we'll still be in that single market. So then we can work out something. And if we don't by then, well, we really will be in a mess.
So when Theresa May came back after the Salzburg rejection and gave that speech from Downing Street, and the pound plummeted to its lowest level since the referendum vote, and that, by the way, is after it plummeted at the referendum vote already. I remember what the pound used to be like against the dollar at 1.6. It's now somewhere around, 1.4? What is it? So at the end of the day, Anthony, already it's happening. So I don't understand how you think it's not going to happen.
Well, because the economy, if you look at the figures, our economy is doing relatively well. And certainly doing better than Europe now. We are in recovery from that hit we hit after the Brexit vote, and GDP is up. Unemployment, we haven't got unemployment in Europe, don't forget.
Well, if the governor of the Bank of England is saying that 30% will be wiped off the value of the property market...
He's like Starmer. He's another old Ramona.
Okay.
We have to get away from this.
Yeah. So
we have to be strong.
So experts' opinions only matter when they're Brexiteers?
Well, we know the experts from the polls at the last general election, don't we? We know we can trust them.
Anthony, you do sound a bit like the chap that called in and said Article 50 isn't reversible because he says it isn't, even though he'd had no constitutional training. When I suggested to him that Lord Kerr, the author of Article 50, said it was reversible, he said he knew better than Lord Kerr.
I don't really trust Lords because they're just packed full of Ramonas, aren't they? And they're really well past their sell-by date.
It's beautiful.
I trust May.
It's beautiful. It's all coming out now. So the Governor of the Bank of England, you know better when it comes to our economy than the Governor of the Bank of England. You know better when it comes to constitutional law than Lord Kerr because he's a member of the House of Lords. What is it? Is there anything that anyone who doesn't agree with your political views can say with any credibility that you would accept at face value?
Not really, because we know that these experts, as Gove said, are not really worth the paper they're written on. What I trust is the people who are trading, the individuals and their customers and the people who actually drive this economy. And they're the ones who are driving it.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you. I think that in itself was self-evident there, but you got the last word.
We move on now to something completely different. A story that